Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if issei get his own persona and after had harem? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. If you like to hear adult version of this and other stories, I'll give you link of my Patreon. Go support and follow the Vergil Creiger for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. That morning in history class, issei heard a quote from an old Chinese scholar. It went something like this: "Once I dreamt I was a butterfly. I forgot myself and knew only my happiness as a butterfly. Soon I awoke, and I was myself again. Did I dream that I was a butterfly? Or do I now dream that I'm a man? Yet there is a distinction between myself and the butterfly. This is a transformation of the physical." For a fair amount of time afterwards, issei would blame this quote for the following dream. The start of the dream was how issei imagined a bad trip must look like. He was following a brightly glowing butterfly down a massive spiraling staircase, with what looked like giant gears and skyscrapers flashing past in the background. The scene was made all the more surreal by the flickering motes of light that were constantly streaming past. It would have been very pretty if it didn't take so long to reach the bottom. By the time it ended, he was ready to pass out from boredom, which was impressive considering he was still asleep. Eventually, he found himself at a circular platform in front of a man in a white suit. Issei spared a glance at the Grecian columns that boxed them in before giving the man a needlessly friendly wave, to which he responded with a needlessly fancy bow. The courtly kind, as if asking him for a dance. You know the one. Suddenly, issei remembered the Grecian columns and how they made the platform resemble a ye old ballroom. Maybe he really was asking for a dance. Could issei say no? The man's coat was just long enough to make it hard to say if it was either debonair formal wear or just a fancy trench coat. Beneath it he wore a black dress shirt with a black tie, and on his lower half he wore black dress shoes and white trousers. He had black hair, was tied back in an elegant ponytail, and when he righted himself, issei could see he was wearing a mask. It was white, deadpan, and half of it was inked with half a black butterfly. The eyes were completely white, and should have been impossible to see through, but since this was obviously a dream, issei was willing to let it slide. Oh shit, was this a masquerade ball? Was I supposed to bring a mask? Issei wondered aloud. This seemed to throw the man off for a moment. Were you supposed to? Oh no. No, you weren't. Good, sighed issei. That would have been embarrassing. The man cleared his throat awkwardly. Everything he said came out very soft-spoken, so it sounded weird. At any rate, I bid you welcome. It is a pleasure to meet you. Same. I am Filon, a dweller between consciousness and... How do you spell that? The man paused. Excuse me? Your name, said issei helpfully. How do you spell it? I don't. Why does it matter? How can say it if I can't even spell it? Issei blinked as if in epiphany. Can I call you Phil? The imaginary man dipped his head and sighed. Yes. Yes, you may. Cool. Idly, issei began to wonder if he could conjure a chair if he concentrated hard enough. I would like to ask of you a simple test, continued Filon valiantly. Can you tell me your name? Issei, said issei. The masked man paused expectantly, but issei was starting to feel sorry for him and stayed silent. Splendid, the man sighed in relief. There are few capable of recalling their identity while in this domain. I know, nodded issei. Lucid dreams aren't for everyone. What do you? The man paused. Where did that chair come from? It's a dream, said issei, leaning back in his armchair and propping his feet on a stool that hadn't been there when he started talking. In a certain sense, it was always here. Filon sighed again, this time with a distinct tone of defeat, and the platform was replaced by a dark study lined with bookcases. The walls were made of pleasantly smelling wood, the fireplace burned merrily, and a fluffy rug sat between issei and a second armchair. Filon sank into it gracefully, a steaming cup of coffee appearing in his hands. Can I have a hot chocolate? Issei's mug came with its own Starbucks napkin, which he thought was a nice detail. Awesome. Filon somehow took a sip through his mask, which issei ignored because it was a dream. It seems you passed that test, he acknowledged, ignoring the lethargic fist pump from issei. But tell me this. He paused, first while issei chugged his drinking chocolate, and then while he relaxed and savored it. Are you aware of the many and varied selves you harbor within you? He could tell by the look on Issei's face that he had his interest. The self suffused with divine love. The self capable of demonic cruelty, like split personalities? Issei was now frowning thoughtfully. Sorry, Phil, but the only voice in my head is you. That's not quite what I meant. Philemon leaned back into his chair, a bit more comfortable on familiar ground. Think of them more as the individual aspects of your personality that come together to form the greater you. Issei hummed as took another sip. Like emotions? More like urges. Wants, needs, desires, fears, scars, grudges, and grievances that form your attachment to the world around you. The link between the inner self and what lies beyond it. The boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness, quoted Issei, earning a toast from Philemon. You've been listening. Don't get too excited. I'm notoriously stupid. He got the sense the man was smiling behind his mask. People live by wearing different masks. Your current self may be only one of those innumerable masks. You, though, have a very firm grip on your identity. I respect your strong will, thanks. You're pretty cool too. This time Philemon actually chuckled a little. He held out one hand, and a floating red gauntlet adorned with green jewels began floating over his palm. I grant you this power, persona. It is the power to summon the selves within you. The gods and the demons you harbor. Which one are you? Asked Issei curiously. Philemon quite pointedly didn't answer. The time is soon when you will need this power. Now you must return to your proper time and place. Are you seriously just going to kick me out of my own dream without answering my question? Yes. The floorboards opened up, and Issei in his armchair and his hot chocolate fell screaming into the abyss, falling past skyscrapers and gears and clouds and teddy bears and rainbows until… How does he even see through that? The fuck just happened? Issei lurched to his feet, sending his desk clattering across the floor. The classroom was empty and eerily quiet. The light shining through the window was a disquieting gray that didn't quite match the time, and the ticking of the clock sounded bizarrely and unsettlingly loud. Did they go home without waking me? Issei's eye twitched as he worked himself into a righteous indignation. Did those jerks seriously go home without waking me? Cursing to himself, Issei grabbed his things and stomped out of the room. A few seconds after he left, a good-looking male student from another class ran past the window. Before he could get too far, the earth exploded in front of him, the impact caused by an enormous creature jumping off the roof. The monster was large enough that he only came up to its knees. It was naked except for a dirty loincloth, and had green skin and bushy red hair. Its teeth and claws were long and sharp, and 2 horns sprouted from its forehead. Its eyes were a blank white, and it clutched a huge meat cleaver in one hand. The student did not back down. King Arthur! He barked. A shimmering figure appeared behind him, resembling a young man of 20. On his chest he wore a shining breastplate that extended down to cover his hips. A blue cape fell to his mid-back and rose in a collar past his cheekbones. His arms were covered in baggy sleeves beneath which were burnished gauntlets, whilst the armor extending down his legs was hidden by long blue strips of cloth. He was almost ethereally beautiful, his blonde hair and green eyes seeming like someone had taken the words knight in shining armor from the daydreams of every teenage girl ever and applied them to his face. In his hand was a golden sword, which shone like the sun as he swung it toward the monster's side. The creature tried to block with its weapon, but the knight's sword cut through the cleaver like paper. The ogre screamed as the knight severed its legs with the same swing, falling with a crash at his feet. Foul-smelling green blood splattered across the pavement, noxious clouds of steam billowing up in sewage-scented clouds. The male student didn't react. He was getting used to it. With one last swing the knight clove off the creature's head, which disintegrated into dust in mid-air. The body slumped to the ground and dissolved into ash, while the shed blood began to evaporate until the only sign of its presence was the crater from when it landed. The knight disappeared as the student took off at a run. Naturally, Issei saw none of this, as he was too busy wandering down empty hallways and wondering why he had a craving for hot chocolate. "Where is everyone?" he grumbled. "The hell happened while I was asleep?" The hallways began to echo with barked orders. Some people were shouting, some were crying, and some were screaming. Several classrooms had been cleared of desks in order to make room for injured students to lie on the floor. Some were bruised, some were gashed. Some were missing limbs and others were missing parts of their bodies. The sheets covering them were drenched with blood, which by now was seeping onto the floor. Many were moaning or screaming, the volume depending on their injury. Others were completely silent, and these people had pieces of cloth placed respectfully over their faces. Around the room, many other students were sobbing on the floor, or shouting at each other, or trying to maintain order. One extremely beautiful student with hair a shocking shade of red was shouting orders, directing those with composure to help the wounded. Her hair was the only reason Issei noticed her, as he was in the middle of a rousing game of Tetris. Frigging T-blocks! He snarled, stabbing angrily at the screen of his phone. At the last minute he backtracked and stuck his head inside the classroom. Whoa! What happened here? You! Gasped the redhead, who recognized him as an acquaintance of one of her clubmates. Where have you been? Asleep, he shrugged. Was there an accident? Haven't you noticed? She snarled, the stress making her snappish. The school has been overrun by monsters. Issei gave her a look. Monsters? She paused a moment to reflect on how that sounded. Look, I know how this must. Monsters aren't real. They are. They're real and running around killing everyone, and the only ones who can fight them are the ones with persona. She was panting when she finished. It was unfair, but she had used him as an outlet for some of her panic. Look, Rias, he paused. Your name was Rias, right? She nodded, his relaxed tone helping calm her down. I'm not sure what went on while I was asleep, but you need to take a deep breath, and he cut himself off when caught on to what she just said. Did you say persona? Yes, nodded Rias, in sudden enthusiasm. They're strange creatures some of us can conjure up to fight the monsters. Issei was giving her a look again. Really? Really? As in, you know, magic? Yes. Magic! She seemed relieved that he was catching on so quick. Magic isn't real. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Screamed Rias, actually stamping one foot on the floor in frustration. Oh, yeah? Said Issei challengingly. Prove it. Rias just glared. Gremory, with a shimmer of light, a beautiful woman appeared out of nowhere. She was wearing silken robes and had hair the same color as Rias. She was also, oddly enough, riding an enormous camel. A few people screamed and backed away in fright. Issei Haidu, meet my persona! Grinned Rias victoriously. This is Gremory, one of the 72 demons in service to King Solomon. Hey, winked Issei saucily. How you doin'? Gremory hid her mouth behind her hand, giggling demurely. What? Blurted Rias. She visibly deflated. What did you just say? I was hitting on her, said Issei helpfully. I mean, have you seen her? And I thought you were hot. That's not the point. Barked Rias, the offhand compliment causing her to blush despite herself. She appeared out of nowhere. Does that surprise you at all? No, said Issei bluntly. People do that in Vegas all the time. It's hardly the proof of God. Except it kind of is, said Gremory, with a voice like an angel's harp and breath like a gentle desert wind. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing to listen. Issei seemed particularly impressed. That was the sexiest thing I've ever heard. Stop it! The door opened with a clatter, and everyone seemed to tense reflexively. In came another girl almost as attractive as Rias, her long dark hair tied in a ponytail. Beside her walked a shorter girl with hair that glittered like silver. Rias? Blinked the taller girl. Is everything all right? Akino! Gasped Rias, her shoulders collapsing with relief. She rushed forward and pulled the other girl into a hug. Are you okay? We're fine. Just a few weaker monsters, that's all. She glanced over her shoulder at Issei. Is that Asia's foster brother? Hey, he waved. How's it going? Oh, right. Rias suddenly seemed to remember what they were arguing about. He doesn't believe the monsters are real. Well, in all fairness, so can you show him your persona? Akino rolled her eyes. Fine. The air behind her began to crackle with electricity, until a bulky form appeared behind her. He was wearing heavy armor and a green cloak, which hung down his left side and covered his arm. His face was aged and weather-beaten, with scraggly black hair and an equally scraggly beard. 12 black wings sprouted from between his shoulders. This is Vergil, Aquino introduced. One of the 20 leaders of the fallen angels mentioned in the Book of Enoch. A muscly old guy with a beard? Issei clarified. That's your inner self? No, admitted Aquino, pulling a riding crop out of her skirt pocket. This is my inner self. She smacked the fallen angel across the face, sending him crashing to the floor. Aquino began using the crop to beat him repeatedly across the head, kicking him in the balls whenever her arm got tired. Yes, mistress, screamed Vergil. Punish me. I've been bad. Squeal, pig! Squeal! Aquino erupted into insane laughter. Rias rubbed the bridge of her nose tiredly. I did not need to see this, said Gremory. I did, said Issei. Rias turned to the shorter girl, trying very hard to ignore what her best friend was doing only a few feet away. Kaneko? She whispered plaintively. Please be sane. The silver-haired girl patted her on the arm consolingly before holding her hands in front of her. In a puff of smoke, a fluffy white cat appeared in her arms, two long tails swishing behind it. This is Nakomata, she murmured quietly. From Japanese folklore. Daw, squealed Issei. It's adorable. Kaneko immediately and visibly warmed up to him. Want to pet him? Fuck yeah, I do. Issei began to scratch the cat under its chin, and soon the only thing louder than its purr was Vergil's frantic pleas for greater punishment. He's so cute, this should be enough, grinned Rias victoriously. Even you have to admit there's no way that second tail is fake. So? Shrugged Issei. Goats have been born with two heads before now. A cat with two tails isn't much of a stretch. For a moment, Rias was genuinely lost for words. I don't, that cat is not a mutant. You shouldn't throw that word around, said Issei disapprovingly. I would have thought you of all people would understand, considering your and Kaneko's hair color. Did you just call me a mutant? It's better than calling you Ginger. She almost punched him. Almost. A good-looking male student about Issei's age burst through the door, panting and out of breath. Hey guys, he gasped. Sorry I'm late. Ran into a. Your name was Kiba, right? Issei interrupted. The other boy blinked in temporary confusion. Yes? What's your persona, King Arthur? Ha, snorted Issei. Bet you he has blonde hair. As if on cue the knight phased into being, sword now sheathed at his hip. Called it. Hang on, said Rias suddenly. You mentioned to Aquino about persona being inner selves. None of us mentioned that. Well, yeah, shrugged Issei. Phil mentioned it. Phil? Her eyes lit up in recognition. You mean Philemon? The man in white? Yeah, we all dreamed about him. It's how we got our persona. At the same time, after being struck by lightning, yes, I wasn't struck by lightning. You were asleep. Surely if I were struck by lightning I would have woken up. No, I mean you didn't need to be struck by lightning. You were already asleep, so you skipped a step and went straight to the dream. Alright, I had the Phil dream, I'll give you that. Issei rolled his eyes as Rias hooted victoriously. But that hardly proves that magic is real. I could have just as easily been hypnotized. By now, Aquino had tired herself out enough that she had given up and tuned back into the conversation. Hypnotized? Yeah, like with Darren Brown. Wait, is that what this is? Was I hypnotized by Darren Brown? Is this a Darren Brown prank? Was Phil actually Darren Brown in cosplay? Am I on TV? He began to wave excitedly at the window. Hi kids! Don't do drugs, okay, said Kiba. I think I've caught up now. That's moronic. Despite her best efforts, Rias was beginning to see the funny side of Issei's constant skepticism. Let's just go outside and then you'll see that. Wait, said Issei. The setting was that the school is being attacked by monsters, right? We're not on TV. There is no setting, and the only thing that can fight them is a bunch of mythological all-stars called persona, right? A Nakomata is hardly a mythological all-star, said Vergil. Kaneko shot him a hurt look, and Aquino kicked him to the floor in response. Arthur! The knight started in surprise when Issei addressed him. You're a holy knight, right? Well, I'm actually a king, he corrected politely. But yes, pretty much, Issei grinned. Do you know any healing magic? I have a magical sheath called Avalon that can heal even the recently dead, responded Arthur dutifully. Will that do? Kiba blinked. Wait, you do? Yes. And you had it the entire time? Of course. You've seen me wearing it. All right then. cheered Issei. We've got a bunch of teen actors lying on the floor covered in ketchup. Go ahead and heal them. Arthur looked to Kiba for permission, getting a strained nod in return. He detached his sword from his hip, the sheath dissolving into white light. The moans of the injured began to die down as their wounds began to heal, sitting up and staring at their restored limbs. The students with covered faces began to jolt awake and gasp for air, and by the time the holy light had dissipated, the room was filled with laughing and crying and people hugging each other. One pretty younger student sidled up to them. Kiba? He blinked away from the merrymaking and tried to look like he noticed her. Yes? She giggled bashfully. I'd just like to thank you for saving. She was abruptly pushed out the way by another girl. I want to thank you too. Before long they were all but elbowing one another out the way for their turn. Thank you? Thank you so much. You saved my brother. You saved my life. I love you. Marry me. Have my babies. Bastard, muttered Issei enviously. How did you know he could do that? Demanded Rias. I guessed, said Issei, giving her a look. If you'd ever played a video game before, you would have too. Rias took a very deep breath, fist shaking. All right. Fine. Fine. But when we go outside and you see what's out there, you will admit that it's real. Again, Issei gave her that smug, provocative smirk. Challenge accepted. The group began marching toward the front entrance, the rest of the students trailing after them. They had been listening to the argument for a while, and found it entertaining enough that they were making bets on how Issei would react to staring a monster in the face. Issei took the lead when the exit was in sight, dramatically flinging the doors wide open. The front yard was overrun by bizarre creatures. Green ogres similar to the one killed by Kiba roamed the grounds. Red variants with huge spiked clubs and blue variants with gourds of booze milled alongside them, while what appeared to be zombies of various ages waddled about their ankles and were occasionally squished underfoot. Odd imps with strange, protruding teeth sat in the trees, on the walls, and on the shoulders of the multicolored ogres, chewing on fruit, branches, stones, and unidentified clumps of meat. As one, they turned to stare at the crowd of students. The crowd of students turned to stare at Rias and the other persona users. Rias and the other persona users turned to stare at Issei. Issei just stood there and stared at the monsters. There was a very long, very awkward pause. Eventually, Issei gave Rias an expectant pat on the shoulder. Well, go on then. This threw her for a moment. What? You're the ones with the trained anime stunt doubles. You take care of this. That was the setting, right? We're not on TV. There is no setting. Issei chose a new target. Kiba, please don't bring me into this. Surely you, as a testosterone-fueled teenage boy, would be willing to. Issei cut himself off, gasped dramatically and pointed at the creatures. Holy shit, they're attacking. Before he could stop himself, Kiba was already in motion. Arthur, the holy knight rushed forward, 3 ogres torn apart with a single swing. His golden sword moved so fast it was only a yellow line ripping the monsters apart. As they began to crowd around him, a bolt of lightning fell out of the clear sky, striking the thick of the pack and sending them flying in a massive explosion. I do not fear pain, roared Vergil. He floated with his wings spread as the air around him crackled with electricity. I relish it. Gremry blew a kiss at the mob. Many of the ogres froze with expressions of rapture as Arthur and Vergil continued to decimate their number, while a few of the imps straight up fell out of the sky in blissful stupefaction. Every few seconds an ogre or a zombie or several would hit the dirt, as the two-tailed cat darted through their ankles and ripped off their legs. Issei leaned down so he was on level with Kaniko's ear. You have the best persona ever. She graced him with a rare smile. I do, don't I? Everyone fall back, shouted Rias. Issei shot her a baffled look. Why? It was just getting good. His eyes widened in realization. Oh, are you running out of special effects? Don't worry, I understand. There are no special effects. Rias barked. Look, do you remember the dream we all had? The Phil dream, yes. Well, everyone that had that dream can summon a persona. Which means you can too. Issei began to grin. So you want me to finish them off? Yes. But be careful, you might not manage it on your first. She had to stop there, because he'd already wandered off. I summon you in the name of your lord and master, Darren Brown. From the darkest depths of, is this really all right? Wondered Kiba. He might get himself hurt. Or worse. We'll save him if it gets dangerous, said Rias. We just need to make him understand that this is real. If he keeps running around thinking this is some elaborate reality show, then all that'll achieve is him getting himself killed. Flying spaghetti monster. Issei appeared to be reaching the climax of whatever he was doing. Come forth. Persona. The sky darkened with ominous black clouds. There was a rumble of thunder, and the wind began to blow in odd shapes around Issei's dorky pose. You can't be serious, whispered Rias. There's no way that actually, I am thou. A phantom image of a red gauntlet adorned with green jewels began to appear over his left hand, which he had pointed at the sky Kamina style towards the end of his insane rant. Thou art I. The gauntlet disappeared, but the large gem on the back of his hand remained. It began to glow with an almost painful brightness, floating a few meters above his head and separating into a pair of incandescent green eyes. From the sea of thy soul I cometh. Wind, lightning, and an oppressive sense of enormity hit the courtyard like a hammer. The monsters cowered back while the onlookers hid behind the four persona. Around the floating eyes appeared a head, then a neck, then a body, then a colossal pair of wings. The immense, undulating form began to flicker in and out of visibility like a faulty light bulb, the atmospheric disturbance increasing as it pushed ever closer to reality. I am Creiger, the Red Dragon Emperor. Above Issei's head hovered an enormous red dragon. Its crimson scales glittered with each lingering flash of lightning, its forelegs long and muscular enough to bench press as building. A tail long enough to wrap around a jumbo jet twice swished behind it, while a pair of immense wings beat slowly but powerfully behind it. 3 horns adorned the head atop its winding neck, 2 sweeping past its crown and 1 standing atop its nose. Emerald eyes glowed over impossibly huge teeth, from between which tongues of flame flickered like tiny serpents. Holy balls! Considering they were all thinking it, Akino could be excused her language. Beneath this dragon, this leviathan, Issei smiled. So, Creiger, huh? With 2 DS. Well, I do love me some double DS. There was some nervous tittering from the peanut gallery. What are you going to do now? What do you ask? Issei considered this for a moment. Well, for starters, he turned to the waiting monsters and grinned. Torch these fuckers! With a mighty roar, a great gout of flame burst from Creiger's jaws. Most of the mob was obliterated in moments, even the ground beneath them reduced to a huge, molten trench. The onlookers were nearly blown away as the dragon took flight, chasing the fleeing monsters from the sky and carpet bombing them in a hail of fire. I'm so glad I'm too dumb to tell how they're doing these special effects, grinned Issei. This is awesome. Are you kidding me? Screamed Rias, her voice cracking from exasperation. After a demon, a fallen angel, King Arthur, an army of monsters and a literal dragon, you still can't believe this is real? I know you're in the occult research club and all, said Issei condescendingly. But seriously now, magic isn't real. Rias made a funny noise and sank her head into her hands. That said, Issei paused as Creiger landed with a crash behind him. I'm going to have to split. What? Rias' head shot up. Why? I promised my sister I'd visit her in the hospital. Asia? Something seemed to click. Oh God, Asia! What if the monsters have already made it inside? Plus my parents are working late tonight, so I'm the only one that can see her. You coming? I to the hospital? Rias glanced at the other students nervously. I'm sorry, but I need to stay here. There are only 4 Persona users here, and we need to keep everyone safe. Which means you have 3 heavy hitters to hold the fort while you're gone, Issei pointed out. Look, I know you're in character and all, but even if I'm her brother, you're still her club captain. She said she's gotten very close to you recently, and I know it would mean the world to her if you came. She was clearly hesitating. That's I don't. Rias, Issei climbed up Creiger's wing until he was sitting at the base of the dragon's neck. When this all is said and done, we're going to go back to school. We're going to graduate, get jobs, get married and have children. When those children ask if you've ever ridden a motherfucking dragon, how do you want to answer? Time's up. Let's go, buddy. Time's a-wastin'. With a Godzilla-like roar they really should have been expecting from something that lived in Issei's head, Creiger took flight. Wait! Shouted Rias, one arm shielding her eyes from the winds of his wings. Don't go yet. The tip of Creiger's tail whacked into her at the last possible moment, and on sheer instinct she grabbed onto it for dear life. As the red dragon soared off in the general direction of Kua Hospital, poor Rias was dragged screaming along for the ride. The road, shadowed on both sides by towering skyscrapers, was choked with abandoned cars. A group of screaming pedestrians was weaving desperately between them, chased closely by a boar the size of a truck. It had leathery brown skin with huge veins that glowed the same color as lava, and down its back ran a mane of orange hair. Its huge tusks protruded forward like hooks, tossing out the way anything they didn't shred. A huge shadow passed briefly overhead, and by the time someone glanced over their shoulder the boar was gone. "Can you even eat that?" wondered issei. "I thought you were supposed to be a figment of my imagination. I'll try anyway. See what happens." With a distressing crunch, Drake landed at the peak of a tall office building. He lifted the squealing pig in one claw and took an enthusiastic bite. "Issei!" someone shouted. "Get me down from here, you bastard! Did you hear that?" He glanced over both shoulders. "I could have sworn I heard Ria's voice just now." "You did. The red-headed female has been clinging to my tail since we departed. We took off like 9 minutes ago. How is she still holding on? I'm going to kill you, issei. Should I shake her off?" "Nah, I'd look like a dick to the viewers." "Lift her up." Without taking his jaws off the boar, Drake delicately lifted his tail and allowed her to dangle over his back. Rias began to kick her legs in panic. I'm falling. Relax. Just stop, ow. Just stop kicking your legs and I'll help." As Rias' legs finally stilled, issei gently took her by the ankles and guided her towards the crook of the dragon's neck. She clung to him in terror when she was finally seated, her hair sticking out in all directions and her eyes wild and bloodshot. For a while she just sat there and shivered while issei sympathetically and guiltily rubbed her on the back. "Rias?" issei was almost whispering, as though trying not to spook her. "Why were you holding on to my dragon's tail? How dare you ask me that?" she hissed, nails digging painfully into his arms. "Why didn't you stop?" "I didn't know you were there," he shrugged, trying desperately not to reveal how funny he thought this was. "There was so much wind blowing past that I only heard you after we stopped." Issei frowned thoughtfully. "Speaking of wind, it looks like you got way worse than I did. Hold still while I fix your hair." "No," she mumbled weakly. Don't she half-heartedly tried to bat his hands away, but was far more preoccupied with holding on to him for dear life. Issei began to gently smooth out her hair, which began to stick to his fingers from the static. He kept going, and started to comb it with his fingers when it was more or less straight. "Your hair is amazingly soft," he marveled. Switching to a comb, he pulled out the breast pocket of his school uniform. "It's a shame you're not a cat." "Shut up," she croaked. She had buried her head into the crook of his shoulder as he worked, grudgingly starting to relax under his ministrations. "What sort of self-respecting straight man carries a comb anyway?" "For my sister," he explained, putting his left arm comfortingly around her waist while he continued to work with his right. "Asia likes it when I fix her hair." He stashed the comb away when he was done and continued to stroke her hair. After a few minutes she drew away and rubbed at her eyes with her wrist. "Thanks," she mumbled reluctantly. "I'm okay now." "Would you like me to take you back?" asked Issei gently. "We can go slower if you want." "That's probably not a good idea," said Drake, allowing the mutilated remains of his prey to drop to the city floor. "We're closer to the hospital than we are to the school. It will be faster and more efficient if we take her with us." "It still might be for the best," Issei insisted. "She's obviously shaken up. We should take her back to her friends and—" "No," croaked Rias. "You don't have to do that. I can tell you're still shaken up," Issei insisted. He glanced over the dragon's side to the dizzying drop below. "It'll help if you're around friends." "You were right about Asia," she pointed out. "She's all by herself with no way to protect herself. If you go by yourself, then it's just you and whatever frightened survivors you come across. Gremory was based off a moon goddess, so she has access to powerful mind magic. Your odds of dying are a lot lower if you have me backing you up." "The female is correct," nodded Drake. "Even if I have enough brute force to tank an army, I admit I'm lacking when it comes to technique. Her powers would cover my weaknesses nicely." Issei hesitated. She was still holding onto his shirt with a grip that turned her knuckles white. Still, you were right, she said again. She was looking very firmly at his chest, and not at the distant pavement. About Asia. She's your sister, but she's my club mate. If I went back now, I wouldn't be doing it to keep the others safe. I'd be doing it because I was scared. And I'm not going to abandon anyone over a stupid reason like that. For a moment, Issei just looked at her. All right, he nodded finally. Hold on. As soon as he was facing forward again, Rias had her arms in a death grip around his chest, her eyes tightly shut, and her face buried in the crook of his neck. She felt the dragon lurch and the air begin to swoosh by as they took off, but it lacked the devastating punch from when she clung to Creiger's tail. Issei sat rock steady, his reassuringly calm heartbeat most likely coming from his mount being an extension of his being. Rias began to relax as she melted into him like a big, warm safety blanket. She had somehow managed to fall into a light doze by the time Creiger's hard break jolted her awake. His wings flapped powerfully as he hovered over the hospital car park, a sharp contrast to the almost lethargic wing beats on the way there. Either the monsters here were smarter or word had spread, because Rias could see creatures of all shapes and sizes fleeing for the hills. She felt barely a bump as they finished their descent, Creiger almost daintily alighting on the ground before thoughtfully extending a wing for them to use as a ramp. Like the other child he was, Issei used it as a slide, squealing giddily all the way down. Rias blinked after him, the fog of sleep still clouding her brain, before swinging her legs over the dragon's side. Creiger just so happened to flex his shoulders as she stood up, throwing her feet out from under her, and sending her skidding to the ground with a shriek. She shot Issei a glare, face glowing pink, as though daring him to comment. He didn't notice, too busy focusing on how the hospital doors had been smashed inward. The inside of the hospital lobby was littered with broken glass, while the metal frames they used to sit in twisted inward as though bent by a violent impact. The front desk, the waiting room chairs, and parts of the ceiling had been torn apart, as though a giant had forced its way through without care for its surroundings. The walls and floor were streaked with blood, the dismembered remains of doctors and patients alike lying in grisly silence about the room. There's no signs of a barricade, Issei pointed out. That doesn't make any sense. Aren't hospitals supposed to be, like, in the top 4 places to hole up in during the apocalypse? The other 3, naturally, being police stations, shopping malls, and schools. I doubt they had the chance, remarked Rias. When the creatures came, they all just sort of phased in between one frame and the next. Not many appeared indoors, but enough probably spawned at the door that no one had time to react. A thought occurred to him. How long was it between the monsters popping up and meeting me? I think it was 4 hours. Maybe 5? Wow. I was tired, wasn't I? This earned a small snort from Rias. She wondered if this was his way of easing the tension. Asia is in room 302 on the 3rd floor. We should take the stairs if we can. Hold it. She grabbed his arm as he started moving. His legs kept going while his upper body stayed where it was, and soon it was less about keeping him from running off and more about keeping him from falling over. We don't know how many enemies are nearby, she continued, having apologized for the goof. Hang fire while I perform reconnaissance. Gremry, search! The red-headed woman faded back into existence, still astride her massive, incongruous camel. She gave Issei a flirtatious wave before sending a wave of sand-colored light from her fingertips. It swept slowly around the room before coming to hover around a heap of bodies. There is only one life form on this floor, and it's hiding over there, reported Gremry. Should I attack? Nah, give me a minute, said Issei. He glanced out the door at the big red dragon waiting patiently outside. I don't suppose you can shrink, can you? As a matter of fact, yes. With a glow of red light, Creiger began to fold in on himself, and by the time Rias had gotten over the initial disbelief, he was already sitting comfortably on Issei's shoulder. Rather than simply change his size, he had transformed into a cartoonishly adorable mascot animal, with big eyes, tiny wings, and an adorable chirp that could easily be mistaken for the call of a young bird. I'm warning you now, do not try to cuddle me. Issei frowned as Creiger's tail flicked against the back of his neck. Didn't I buy Asia a toy that looked like you? Only blue, you mean Rasse? Blinked Rias. She loves that thing. Yes, I'm very child-friendly. Wasn't there a monster or something you wanted me to deal with? Issei had to stop and think for a moment. Oh. Right. Good thing you remembered. Ria sighed and face-bound. Issei took a few steps forward and placed himself between her and the pile of bodies. We know you're in there. Come out before we set you on fire. There was a rustle as something began to pull its way out of the heap of flesh. Weakly, with the set of her shoulders suggesting fear and the slouch of her back suggesting pain, a nurse a few years older than them pulled her way out of the pile. Her uniform was torn and filthy, her face was smeared with other people's blood, and her long black hair was tangled and matted. Though she was very shapely and presumably very beautiful, the effect was offset by the gut-clenching shell shock in her eyes. Holy crap, whispered Rias. Kuroka? Issei shot her a look. You know her? Of course. She's Kaniko's older sister. She hurried over to the older girl and tried to take her hands, only to be almost knocked over when she threw her arms over her shoulders and started to sob hysterically. You're not going to help? Nope, grunted Issei, keeping a careful distance. If the Phil dream was real and this isn't all an elaborate prank, then the last thing that woman needs is some random stranger getting all up in her grill. And if it is, then I'm sure that these two have spent hours practicing for this. And really I've forced Rias to ad-lib enough. Good point. Kuroka? Murmured Rias urgently. Kuroka, are you injured? Are you alright? They're all dead, the nurse wailed. All of them. They're all dead. She began to duck into Ria's chest, and the redhead had to take her by the elbows to keep her from collapsing. They came so fast, and they started killing, and people were dying, and people were hiding, and I was so scared and I hid, but people were being found anyway, and I knew the only way to escape was to hide under the Kuroka choked herself off with a violent shudder, as though physically forcing the memory out of her mind. Ria stroked her hair and whispered soothingly to her for a few moments as she gasped for air, startling back when she suddenly straightened. Oh God, Chiron! Where is Chiron? Is she all right? Who is Chiron? Asked Issei curiously. She means Kaniko, answered Rias distractedly. Kaniko is her nickname. Is Chiron okay? Screamed Kuroka, violently shaking the other girl by her shoulders. Did those monsters hurt her? She's fine! Shouted Rias, fighting to be heard over the desperate wails. She's back at the school with the others. You can come and see her when we leave. Let's go, begged Kuroka, the flesh beneath her grip beginning to bruise. I need to know she's alright. Not yet, said Rias placatingly. We're looking for a girl named Asia Argento. She's in room. No, please! Screamed Kuroka frantically. You have to, I need to see. This is going nowhere, interjected Drake. As she is now, this woman is of no use to anyone. We can't just leave her, snarled Rias angrily, giving the sobbing nurse a protective hug. I'm not going to abandon her. I never suggested that you should, said Drake, actually sounding a bit offended. All I meant was that you should use your persona to help her before we proceed. Gremory? He could tell by the look on her face that she didn't get it. How? The Moon Devil is a master of mind magic, yes? Then why not simply remove the traumatic memories from her mind? Rias appeared thrown by the idea. Don't take away her understanding of her situation, just the memories that will scar her or impede her ability to function. That's not a bad plan, nodded Issei thoughtfully. He shot a look at the other persona. Can you do it? Possibly. There was a lengthy pause as Gremory rolled the concept around her mouth. There could be side effects, but only if she resists the spell. The only way I'm doing it by force is if I don't care how much of her mind is collateral damage. You can take them away? Kuroka clung to the concept like a lifeline. You can take away the screams? The screams and the smells and the visions? She clung to the hem of Gremory's robe, crying like a child. Please, please, make them stop. Issei, Drake and Gremory turned to Rias, leaving the decision in her hands. She thought of Kaniko. She imagined the look in her eyes every time her sister got off work early to pick her up from school. Okay, she nodded slowly. Let's do it. Gremory gently placed her hand atop Kuroka's head. The begging receded into whimpers, then into sleepy muttering. Issei and Rias caught her as she slumped to the floor, awkwardly dragging her over to the wall so they could prop her up. For a long moment they just watched her sleep, so whispered Issei. How long do you think she'll? Kuroka lurched upright with a scream. The two persona users recoiled backwards with screams of their own, while Drake was knocked into the air and belched out a small fireball in surprise. Gremory let out an undignified squeal as it exploded against the ceiling, flailing her arms before tumbling from the camel's back. The beast honked loudly and escaped through the front door, while a flock of birds was startled off a nearby rooftop. Ugh, what happened? Groaned Kuroka. She sat up and rubbed her eyes with a massive yawn. Issei noticed she was a lot prettier now that she'd calmed down. What time is it? How do you feel? Asked Rias cautiously. Drake sheepishly settled himself back on Issei's shoulder, while Gremory wandered off to look for her camel. Do you remember anything? Gradually, her eyes started to clear. Yes. Wow, it's like my memories were censored to make them PG-13. She hopped spryly to her feet, grinning cheerfully. Awesome. Thanks. She began to pick at her clothes and hair, pouting in annoyance. I need a shower. And a sandwich. There are vending machines over there, remarked Issei, poking one thumb over his shoulder and nearly taking Drake's eye out. We can smash them up if you're desperate. Issei, hissed Rias, interrupting Kuroka before she could agree. We can't do that. That's illegal. Issei gave her a condescending look. Rias. Poor naive Rias. What do you think is the first thing to be robbed during the apocalypse? Rias blinked at the unexpected question. Vending machines? Cash machines, he corrected firmly. Banks. Those little slidey money calculators that appear in every shop in the world. It lasts until people realize that money is useless, then they start going for the food. We need to take the initiative while people are distracted by the free money. He's right, Kuroka pointed out. Don't say that, hissed Rias. Never say that. While they were talking, Issei had walked up to the nearest machine and allowed Drake to sear a hole through the transparent screen, holding him up like an adorable red blowtorch. He grabbed himself a BLT as soon as it was open, making a display of how delicious it was. It's so good. Issei, we're not going to steal. Is there an egg salad? You bet. Rias stood with mouth agape as Kuroka skipped forward, giving Issei a gleeful high five before chowing down. She rubbed the bridge of her nose and sighed. Can I have a tuna mayo? Soon the three of them had settled themselves into some of the less damaged chairs while they ate. So, began Kuroka conversationally. What did you say you were here for? My sister, Issei reminded her. Asia Argento. She should be in room 304. Asia? She blinked. You mean the super religious, super adorable blonde girl with the blue dragon plushie? That's the one. I love that girl. Kuroka squealed, giving off the general air of someone talking about a basket of kittens. Isn't she just the cutest thing ever? My family adopted her a few months ago, grinned Issei. It was the best decision we ever made. They began to swap stories and pictures of their little sisters, Drake and Gremory, who had abandoned the search for her camel, glancing curiously over their shoulders. After a few minutes, Issei suddenly remembered Rias was there too. Do you have any younger siblings? He asked. Rias shifted awkwardly. I have a nephew, she nodded shyly, showing them a picture on her phone. A cute little boy with hair the same color as hers was sitting on her knee. They both melted like butter, and Rias quietly decided they were worth the annoyance. Okay, so, I've only just noticed this, began Kuroka. But why do you have a dragon on your shoulder? Aren't the monsters the bad guys? He's not one of them, explained Rias. He's a persona. Kuroka gave her that blank smile people get when you throw proper nouns at them without context. A what? A stand, said Issei. People have them now. Oh, okay. What's a stand? Asked Rias curiously. They shared a glance before laughing mockingly at her expense. Philistin, snorted Issei. Pleb, agreed Kuroka. Ah, Rias nodded sagely. So it's a pop culture reference. They had all finished eating, and Issei was offering a hand to help her up. She suddenly realized that they had essentially abandoned Asia in order to goof off. Don't worry, Issei grinned. When this is all over, we'll grab Asia and all your club goons, rustle up some popcorn and waste a weekend with some good hard JoJo binging. Sound good? She gave him a small smile and took his hand. Sounds good. Kuroka had offered them the use of a staff-only elevator, but they had decided they didn't want to attract any creatures that might still be in the building. Gremory had gone back to wherever his persona go while Drake remained on issei's shoulder. Issei himself led the way while Rias carefully watched the rear. At one point a group of ugly brown goblinoids came rushing down the hall towards them, noticed Drake at the last minute, and almost tripped over each other trying to escape. So maybe they were just being needlessly paranoid. Here we are, said Issei. Room 302. Here's a thought, said Kuroka suddenly. Does Asia have a persona? That's Rias began, then thought about it. Possible. Everyone else in my club has one. Plus him. Let's just ask if she had the Phil dream, suggested Issei. Even if she hasn't actually popped the thing out yet, that doesn't mean that it isn't still waiting in the wings. He slid the door open, strode through, and slammed painfully into the solid wall on the other side. Son of a bitch! He roared, clutching his nose. When the hell did that get there? No idea, murmured Kuroka, carefully trailing her fingers across the barrier. I brought her lunch earlier, and it was fine then. Then where the shit did my sister go? At long last, Issei had been rattled. Hey! Is there anyone here? Answer me now or I swear to. Be quiet! Someone shouted. A nearby door had been inched open, allowing someone with a gravelly voice to peep through. You'll attract more of those things. What happened to the girl in this room? Rushed Rias, cutting off Issei before he could lose his temper. Please, we need your help. We're her. I don't care. The man snarled. Just shut up and leave. We can't fit any more people here, so you can't stay. Go away, she's probably dead anyway. Issei gave him a cold look before glaring stonily at the impeding wall. Drake? Yeah? Burn it down. Gremory barely appeared in time for her and Kuroka to be shielded from the blast. She heard screams from the other survivors as they frantically closed the door, flames licking at its edge as a blast far too big for such a small dragon crashed against the wall. It didn't even leave a mark. They may as well have done nothing at all. The air shimmered, partially from the heat and partially from Issei's lingering fury. Rias, he said finally. Can you check the room with search magic? She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Gremory, the demoness waved her hand toward the empty doorway, the odd light flashing for barely a moment before going out. It's empty, she said quietly. Sorry, then scan the rest of the building. Issei snapped. Gremory recoiled in shock. I can't. There's too much space for me to reach all at once. How about now? Drake plopped himself on her shoulder, red light emanating from his tiny body. As the light soaked into Gremory's pores, her magic exploded outwards, briefly filling every inch of the hospital's interior before disappearing into her chest like water down a drain. She blinked, disoriented, as Drake fluttered back to Issei's side. How did you do that? Easily. Did you find her? Interrupted Issei. Gremory couldn't quite bring herself to meet his eyes. No. I'm sorry. There was a tense silence. Rias wondered, briefly, if he was about to lash out at them. Let's go, he said finally. We're going to the roof. Wait! A gray-haired man in a white coat fell out of the survivor's hiding place. Kuroka would later identify him as the hospital's director. Please take us with you. We can't survive on our own. Fuck you! Issei barked, stalking up the stairs as the two girls nervously followed. When they reached the roof, he waited until they were clear before slamming the door as hard as he could. He pressed his forehead against it as he fought to get his breathing under control. Drake changed back. Right. Kuroka squealed as the roof was suddenly filled with a colossal red dragon. Issei ignored her and turned to Rias. Can you use Gremory to search as we fly? Yes, I can. Good. We're heading back to the school. I need you to scan the streets for Asia. I can do that, she nodded slowly. Issei, the first people she'll look for are us, he interrupted. Just like the first person we looked for was her. She'll be heading for the school. He hopped up on the dragon's back, Rias behind him and Kuroka behind her. She reached around and gently took his hand. She's going to be all right. Issei didn't respond, but he gently squeezed back. When Drake took off, his roar echoed like a scream. It had only been half an hour since Issei and Rias left, and Kiba was already getting antsy. Survivors had been funneling in for a while, and most of them were injured. Arthur had continued to heal them using Avalon, leaving Akino and Kaneko to patrol the school perimeter. He was trying to ignore the mixture of fear and awe in their eyes after seeing his persona, as well as the possible consequences of general sentiment falling either way. Realistically, half an hour was only 30 minutes. However, he still found himself panicking at the thought of them being surprised by some nasty lurking around the corner. "Hey," he groaned tiredly. The first-year girl acting as his assistant immediately snapped to attention. "Are they back yet?" It took her a moment to figure out who he meant. "Oh, you mean no, there's still no sign of them." Then Kiba paused while he rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Can you at least get a sit-rep from the others about how everyone is doing?" She hesitated, either thinking it pointless or just not wanting to leave him alone. "Please? Okay, I'll see what I can do." Kiba gave her a grateful nod as she hurried out the door. There were no more wounded, so he slumped himself in the corner and allowed himself to doze off. In his mind's eye, he could see a bird's-eye view of the hospital where he knew Asia had spent the last year. A familiar red dragon was perched on its roof, and on its back sat Issei, Rias, and a nurse with a naggingly familiar face. They flew off into the distance, and a glowing white butterfly shimmered across his line of sight. "Worry not, my child. Your friends are alive and well. Wake up. Please wake up." With a snort, Kiba shot upright, vision temporarily blurring with an odd sense of vertigo. "What? What's going on? The student council just arrived. And they're all persona users." With that, Kiba was wide awake. "Take me there." Predictably, the group was meeting in the student council room. It was insanely opulent, with soft leather sofas, an enormous mahogany desk, and an even bigger window overlooking the school grounds. The president, Sona Shirtorai, was tearfully embracing Akino in the center of the room. The others were scattered about the room. One of them, Nimura, if memory served, was chatting with Kaneko. 8. That was 8 new persona users. At last, some good news. "How long has she been gone?" Sona was asking. "A little over half an hour," shrugged Akino. "I don't think we need to worry just yet, especially since she has Issei backing her up. When you have an actual fire-breathing dragon in your corner, there's not much that can stop you." There was a derisive snort of laughter from the edge of the room. The only boy on the council, a pale-haired young man named Genshiro Saji, was openly laughing at them. Kiba felt his hackles rise from the mocking tone. "What's so funny?" "The fact that you think Issei Hayato could help anyone," Saji chortled. "Some dumb pervert with no talents outside being an asshole couldn't achieve anything. I feel sorry for your club leader if she's dragging dead weight like him around." Akino smiled, which those who knew her recognized as a sign of hostility. "Compared to you? Of course," he grinned. "Some random, run-of-the-mill dragon can't hold a candle to someone who opposed the Hindu god Indra." The shadows began to pool about his feet, thickening into a gooey black sludge flickering with purple lightning. The murk began to rise upward as a huge head, until a huge black serpent floated around him in lazy circles. It had a sharp, arrow-shaped snout and 3 violet eyes, while a collection of disquieting tentacles hung from its back. "Meet Vritra, the Black Dragon King. This is what you called me out for," it grumbled. "To show me off?" Kaneko looked at him for a second. "Is that it?" Saji blinked. "What? Is that as big as it gets?" "I know. At full size it's bigger than this building. At full size, Issei's persona could flatten this building," snorted Kiba. "You'll need more than that to impress us." Saji fumed at this indignity, but was interrupted before he could reply. "That reminds me," said Sona quickly. "We have news about Issei Hayata's mother." Kiba immediately assumed the worst. "Oh God. She's not. She's alive as far as we know," said Sona quickly. "Let me start from the beginning. Do you know why we were outside the school when things went bad?" "I think so," offered Akino. "Rias told me once that you have regular outings together for the sake of team bonding." "Right," nodded Sona. "Well, this time we were hanging out at the Sun Mall trying out some seasonal food when the attack happened. We awakened our persona at the same time and basically flattened them, but by then most of the people in there with us were dead." There was a unanimous cringe of sympathy. "One of the survivors was Mrs. Hayadu," she continued. "It seemed she was buying books for her daughter. We were going to escort her along with everyone else to the school, but we were ambushed as we went past Aleya's shrine. Mrs. Hayato was injured taking an attack meant for someone else. Then when 2 of our persona users went to help, they got cut off by the mob. That many? Kiba decided against asking if there were any fatalities. And more, Sona nodded. The 3 ended up barricading themselves inside the shrine, while the rest of us had to flee. The plan was for us to mount a rescue mission after the civilians made it to safety. But you're all here, Akino realized. Who stayed behind? 2 young men not affiliated with us, who just happened to be in the same place when things kicked off, said Sona, pushing her glasses up as though recalling the encounter. They said their names were Matsuda and Motohama. Aren't those Issei's friends? Kiba wondered aloud, just before his face warped in horror. Oh God, Issei. He doesn't know. There's no way to contact him either, said Kaneko glumly. So we need to wait until he gets back. If he gets back at all. Really? Blinked Sona. Why don't you just call him? For a long moment, Kiba and his club mates just sat and looked at her. What? By phone, she clarified. He has it on him, right? She paused briefly. Wait, are you just being passive-aggressive because I forgot to call you on the way here? We can call him, whispered Kiba, before punching the air with an infuriated roar. We can call him. Of course we can call him. Why the hell did nobody think of this earlier? Do we have his number? Asked Akino. No, but guess whose number I do have. Kiba whipped out his phone and dialed Ria's number. She took a few minutes before replying, but replied nonetheless. Yato? Sorry about that, Issei had to stop the dragon before I could answer. Is everything okay? Yes. Everything is fine. Kiba was near laughing from relief. Are you at the hospital? No, we're heading back now. We just set off, so we'll be a while yet. How did it go? There was an unsettling pause. Do you want the good news or the bad news? Kiba felt his blood run cold. What's the bad news? The chatter going on in the background went dead silent. Asia wasn't in the building. Gremory searched the place from top to bottom, but no luck. Do you think she escaped? We don't know. The door to her room had a blank wall behind it. Since monsters roam the streets and all our friends have superpowers, I couldn't tell you what it might mean. Kiba rubbed between his eyes and took a deep, steadying breath, trying not to think of how Issei must be feeling. Well, at least you 2 are okay. What's the good news? We met Kaneko's older sister in the hospital. She's alive and well, and we're bringing her back with us. Kiba's eyes widened. She is. Great. Can you? He glanced over his shoulder at the younger girl. Can you put her on so Kaneko can talk to her? Me? Why? Sure, I'll pass you over now. He gently pushed the phone into her hand before gesturing for Akino and Sona to speak off to the side. Asia is missing. Gremory swept the building with her search magic, but came up dry. There were gasps and hisses from the people listening. I'm sorry, whispered Sona. So then she must be. Not necessarily, said Kiba. The first time we used search magic, we swept the school for anyone still in it. It led us to 3 bodies underneath the stairwell, but no monsters. It only distinguishes between living or dead if she wants it to. If she couldn't find her, then that means Asia left on her own terms, since I doubt any of those things would just pick her up and carry her out. There were a few relieved sighs, and Akino quietly sagged against the wall in relief. Thank God. There was one odd detail though, continued Kiba. The door to her room had a wall behind it. They have no idea why. Maybe it was a Nuracabe, suggested Akino, getting a few odd looks. You know, from Japanese folklore. A moving sentient wall fits the bill perfectly. These monsters come from mythologies and folklore from around the world, so it's not too much of a stretch. Sona cocked her head. Do you really think so? I'm the vice president of the Occult Research Club. I'm very sure. I don't think that's it either, winced Kiba. Knowing how protective he is of Asia, I'm almost certain Issei would have tried to break through by force, and I doubt some no-name ghoul could stand up to the Red Dragon Emperor. Oh shit. Saji glanced at his persona distractedly. Vritra? What's wrong? The dragon shifted its coils nervously. Saji, for the love of God, do not pick a fight with this man. Kaneko tugged at Sona's sleeve and offered her the phone, looking a lot perkier than when she entered the room. She wants to talk to you. Sona held the device up to her ear. Rias? Sona. I'm glad you're okay. Likewise, smiled Sona, some of the tension bleeding out of her shoulders. Are you alright? Mostly. This dragon is a bit uncomfortable. That was odd. It implied the issei's persona was carrying all three of them at once, while at full size Vritra could only carry one at a time. Is Issei with you? Is he? Yes, but why? Issei's mother is holed up in a Leia shrine with his friends Matsuda and Motohama. They're persona users, but she's injured. We don't know how serious it is. There was a muffled gasp from the other side of the phone. Now, Rias, I need you to listen carefully. Kaniko's sister is a nurse, right? There was a subdued confirmation. Does she has a first aid kit with her? There was a burst of muffled conversation from Ria's end. Yes, she does. Excellent, nodded Sona. If they played this right, everyone came home alive. Here's what you need to do. Have Issei take you to a Leia shrine and treat his mother's injuries however you can. Me and the student council will hold the fort here while Akino, Kiba and Kaniko will meet you there. After Kiba uses Avalon to finish her off, you can return as a group. Does that sound like a plan to you? Yes, thank you. We should get moving. I'll see you then. See you then, she echoed, allowing herself a small smile. Good luck out there. You too. She clicked the phone shut and passed it back to Kiba. How fast can the three of you get there? As fast as we need to, grinned Akino savagely. Good. We'll protect the school while you're gone. There are 8 of us, so we should be fine. She paused, suddenly remembering something she noticed when first arriving. I do have one question though. Whatever caused that mess outside? Saji glanced out the window, discreetly cringing at the smoking molten wasteland where the front lawn used to be. That? Laughed Kiba. That's from when Issei Fist activated his persona. You should have seen it. It was crazy. Seriously? Scowled Saji. How tough could he actually be? A deafening, terrifying roar echoed out from the distance. The floor shook, the windows rattled, birds flew out of trees and monsters on the streets below began to flee in the opposite direction. Vritra tried to do the same in a panic, only to bonk painfully into the glass window. Guess that means Issei knows his mother was injured, remarked Akino. He's already lost track of his sister, so I doubt he wants to lose his mother on the same day. We should hurry, nodded Kiba, and the three quickly filed out. Sona glanced at Vritra inquisitively. So who is Issei's persona anyway? Vritra gave her an annoyed glare, clearly still in pain. Draig, the red dragon from the Welsh flag. That's it, snorted Saji. A flag? Vritra rolled his eyes. Look, I told you I was the Black Dragon King, right? Yeah? Well, back then the Dragon Kings were assumed to be the strongest of Dragakind. At the time these 2 dragons, one red and one white, were keeping mostly to themselves. They didn't pick fights, didn't steal treasure, didn't torch random villages for no reason. They were losers, basically. Right, said Sona sarcastically. Then one day they started to fight, and that fight just escalated and escalated until the whole world was getting dragged into it. It eventually got so bad that heaven and hell had to suspend their eternal war and forge an alliance against them, because they just could not fight with these 2 in the middle. When they arrived on the battlefield with their combined armies, the dragons stopped fighting and united against them. And do you know what happened? What? Asked Saji curiously. They got the shit kicked out of them, that's what. Even with their entire military might combined, the 2 were beyond their capacity to kill. It was only after days of battle and more blood, sweat and tears than anyone thought necessary that they were finally sealed away beneath the earth. Vritra seemed to shudder at the memory. Those who survived referred to them as the 2 heavenly dragons, Draig Gotch and Albion Gwyber. The dreaded by heaven and feared by hell. There was tense but slightly awestruck pause. The hand Sona used to adjust her glasses was noticeably shaking. Are you saying that Issei is a threat? Oh god no, laughed Vritra. Usually, Draig is the chillest dragon alive. So long as the White Dragon Emperor doesn't show up to antagonize him, we'll be fine. At that moment, in the hospital Issei had just left, the door to the room full of survivors burst off its hinges. The frightened people cowered away as a tall figure stepped through. He was wearing a black jacket with jeans. His good-looking face was cast in a cold glower. His hair was an eerie shade of white. I'm looking for Kuroka, he barked. Where is SH? To provide maximum drama when issei heroically rides in atop Dragaback, let's look at this from the point of view of the people being rescued. A while earlier, when issei was sleeping and the world was gearing up for a monster apocalypse, everyone was still trundling on as they always had. People were bustling about under the assumption that nothing biblically disastrous was going to happen. The sky was sparkling with a distinct lack of impending doom, and in a certain restaurant in a certain shopping district Sona and her henchmen were sitting around a table eating something salty and high in fat. They were at a restaurant specializing in udon, their table settled against the window. Around it 2 benches sat opposite, 4 of them squeezed onto each side. Sona and Saji had scored the window seats. To his left, Ruruko Nimura was chatting about something stupid. Seriously, hissed Ruruko, the youngest person there. There's been rumors flying around for weeks. Oh really? Said Sona archly. She pushed her hair back delicately while she partook of her noodles, the grace of the action offset by the hilarious slurping noise that followed. And what might that be? People have been seeing things, Ruruko grinned. Things like monsters, fading in and out like ghosts. People with nothing to do with each other are all saying the same thing, and the police are starting to realize it isn't a prank. They even talked about it on the radio. That doesn't mean it's real, said Tsubasa quietly. She was an athletic girl with short dyed hair, and was sitting at the far end of Sona's bench and staring gloomily into her drink. She shifted it nervously with the edges of her hands, causing the ice to clink against the rim. It could easily be a hallucination brought on by things in the water supply. Something that could affect a lot of people, but that wouldn't explain why everyone sees the same things, Ruruko pointed out. And besides, you never drink anything the rest of us don't. By all rights, we should be seeing the same things. She has a point, remarked Momo, an elegant girl with hair dyed a slightly lighter color than Tsubasa, who sat opposite. It is unusual for this to happen to so many people at once. Maybe there's something we're missing? That doesn't mean those monsters are real, insisted Tsubasa frantically. There has to be a reasonable explanation, or else I'm going. You're not going crazy, Saji assured her. You're far too lucid for that. That means there's a reasonable explanation here, and that's what we're trying to find. He got a grateful smile from Tsubasa and an approving one from Sona, the latter of which made him blush. Ruruko pouted at the sight, but let it go. What about you? Me? Tomo, the only person in the group who could match Ruruko in terms of enthusiasm, looked up from her beef bowl from where she was squeezed between Tsubasa and Tsubaki. Why would I know anything? These things that Tsubasa's been seeing. You're from a family of exorcists, right? Anything to add? Tomo cocked her head thoughtfully. Well, I actually heard a few descriptions of these things on the news this morning. None of them sound like the sort things my family gets paid to deal with. She suddenly looked very sheepish, as though she'd been caught slacking on her homework. Sorry, that's, actually all I've got. Ruruko pulled an unmaidenly face, and the whole table laughed. Tsubasa in particular looked like she needed it. Seriously? That's it? Why? Why must you trample my maiden heart so? Try asking Tsubaki. She's from the same kind of family, except she's basically exorcist royalty. Tsubaki snorted delicately. She was the tallest girl there, and had the longest hair and the largest breasts. Saji still thought Sona was the only one for him. My branch of the family was excommunicated a long time ago. Don't expect anything from me. Hang on. Tomo perked up, having obviously spent the last few minutes looking for something helpful to say. What about Rhea, HM? Rhea, a reserved girl who wore her hair in 2 bunches, looked up from where she was scribbling away between Ruruko and Momo. She had brought some of the extra paperwork from student council with her, and hadn't been listening to the conversation. What about me? Your grandmother was a witch, right? Tomo was clearly warming to the idea. Do you think there may be witchcraftian shenanigans going on? Rhea blinked mildly, as if wondering why she was unfazed after hearing such a stupid question. I can't tell if you're joking or not. She sat in bemusement as another ripple of laughter made its way around the table. Well, I'm afraid there's not much I can help you with. My grandmother was considered a witch, yes, but only because she had bizarre dreams. This one actually got Sona's attention. Bizarre? Bizarre how? Prophetic, apparently, Rhea shrugged. I think it's more likely she just had an overactive imagination. So you've never had a dream like that? Asked Tsubasa. She had visibly perked up, and was no longer shaking. You don't think it's real? Oh, definitely not, chuckled Rhea. In the background, Saji ordered some more drinks. Though I admit, I have had a few strange dreams. Momo gave her a curious look. Like? Well, just the other day I had the strangest dream about a man in white. All of a sudden, the whole group was paying attention. He said his name was Filon, and he had a mask patterned after a butterfly's wing, murmured Sona. Rhea gave her a surprised look. Ah, yes, that's right. How did you know that? Because I had the same dream. She had barely finished talking before Saji shot to his feet. I had that dream too. As if competing, Ruruko began to shout that she'd had it as well, and soon everyone was fighting to claim they'd had it too. Tsubasa, said Rhea calmly. You need to calm down. Abruptly, everyone noticed that she'd started to hyperventilate. We all had it. Her glass rattled against the table as her hands shook. The corners of her eyes began to tear up. Sharing dreams, she looked up with a small, scared smile. That's not normal, is it, Tsubasa? Murmured Ruruko hesitantly, glancing at Saji as if for help. If that's true, she was starting to hiccup now. Real panic was in her eyes. Then the monsters, what if they're Tsubasa Yura, interrupted Sona. She placed one hand on Tsubasa's, which was impressive if he remembered they were on opposite ends of the bench. Take a few deep breaths. She guided the younger girl through it, speaking constantly and quietly until the panic attack had subsided. You have nothing to worry about, do you understand me? Nothing at all. But what if this means? It doesn't mean anything, trust me, whispered Sona reassuringly, lips curving in a rare smile. If there's 3 things I can promise you, it's that those dreams meant nothing, magic isn't real, and there is no such thing as monst. She trailed off, glasses sliding down her nose as she peered over their heads at the door. What on earth is that? The man who had just entered the restaurant looked so dramatically out of place it bordered on surreal. He was very tall and dressed all in white, reminding them all of Filon. Unlike the dream man, he was dressed for style rather than elegance, his white jacket and trousers at home on a dance floor more than anywhere else. Like him, he wore a black dress shirt and tie, but unlike him, his shirt was untucked, his top buttons were undone, and his tie hung loose about his neck, managing to be stylish without being uncouth. All of these things the restaurant's patrons noticed first. Then they got to his face. It was very obviously metal, but smooth and well crafted in its imitation. The skin was painted the lightest brown, while eye-shaped spotlights blared out above a carefully perfect nose. Artificial-looking curls dangled from a white fedora, while the jawline curved with metallic smoothness. If it was a mask, it was hard to say how it came off. The mouth was the most bizarre thing about him. Vertical grooves went down either side of his lower lip, allowing his chin and the middle of his lower jaw to clack up and down like a nutcracker doll. The man slowly clacked his teeth 3 times as though smacking his lips before his unsettling spotlight eyes met Tsubasa's. It was panic alone that let her flip their table up like a wall before he attacked. It looked harmless enough at first. In the same moment Tsubasa went for the table, he plucked his hat from his head, throwing it through the air like a frisbee. Halfway to where the student council was sitting, it sprouted buzz saws from its rim, hitting the table just as Tsubasa dragged the others behind the barrier. It cut through the top half of the table like butter, allowing it to fall and hit Saji on the head. Ow! Before continuing in an arc around the room. First it hit a sitting man in the back of the neck, sending his head flying and likewise decapitating the woman sitting opposite them. The blood had barely touched their daughter's face before it embedded in the back of an old man, who had been heading for the entrance when the man in white walked in. For the first time, the metal man spoke. You've been hit by. He reached out, lightly grasping his hat as the old man collapsed. As gravity pulled them apart, the blades tore free with a wet thunk. You've been hit by. The buzz saw retracted into the hat's rim, and he replaced it on his head just as the corpse hit the ground. A smooth criminal. The blood-spattered little girl looked at her parents' headless bodies and screamed. Holy hell! Croaked Ruruko, as everyone not hiding behind their barrier erupted into chaos. It's Michael Jackson, from when he was hot, added Tomo. The resurrected legend had begun to dance, of all things, and every time he flicked his jacket he let loose a swarm of shurikens studded with what was either glitter or glow in the dark rhinestones. Despite the ridiculousness of the sight, it was causing carnage amongst the patrons. Most of them were wounded and a few looked dead. Frankly, enough of them were running in circles that he didn't need to aim. The girl that was orphaned in the initial attack was taking cover under her table, half screaming and half sobbing with her hands over her ears. The sound hurt Saji's head more than all the other screams put together. With a groan, he clutched his hand to the lump left by the falling fragments of table. "Ugh, what happened?" "We're being attacked by a robot, Michael Jackson," responded Tsubasa, having lapsed into an eerie sort of calm that may have been brought on by shock. She shrugged at the look he shot her. "Hey, you know as much as I do. We are not in Kansas, Toto." It was here that Saji noticed a terrified little girl. A large man with a beard ran up behind the Robo Jackson and threw his arms around his neck. About 8 other people followed his lead, dogpiling the thing in an attempt to hold him down. "Wait here," he hissed, barely stopping to think about what he was doing. "I'm going to get the girl." "Saji, wait!" Sona screamed, but he was already out of cover. Not Michael had started to spin like a top, skidding around the room and sending the people holding on to him, as well as any tables or chairs in his way, flying. When the last person disappeared through a wall, he whirled into the center of the room, jumped into the air for one last twirl and landed in a dramatic pose with one arm skyward. Saji was running back to their corner with the girl in his arms when Robo Jackson noticed him. Tsubasa, Sona and Ruruko were all rising to try and help, but he had removed his hat and was getting ready to throw it. She heard the other two scream, but knew it would do no good. As if in slow motion, the hat left his hand. It was then that Tsubasa's latent sixth sense, which had predicted the apocalypse weeks in advance, finally awakened in her hour of need. "I am thou." Just as the spinning hat sprouted blades, it stopped, embedded in a huge shield appearing between Saji and the late musician. It resembled a huge black cross attached to a gray dome. The center of the cross was also gray, with small black circles decorating the rim like chairs around a table. "Thou art I." Light began to spill from the back of the shield, slowly coalescing into human shape. The hat rattled for a moment before flying free, causing the man in white to briefly spin on the spot as he caught it. When he came to a stop, he was facing the side, head bowed and hat pressed to his crown. "From the sea of thy soul I cometh." When the light faded, a young man stood holding the shield. Black armor covered everywhere except his head, the parts covering his hands and feet covered with hooks and ridges. Blue cloth hung from his shoulders, and more dangled from his hips. His skin was lightly tanned while his hair was a dull white and covered one eye, which was an unusual amber color. His features were delicate and almost girlish, beautiful to the point it could make a real woman self-conscious. At his side was a sword, which he left sheathed as he hefted the colossal shield with one hand. "I am Galahad, the perfect knight." Robo Jackson slowly straightened, those creepy spotlights glaring at the shield knight from the corners of his eyes. "Are you okay, Annie?" he hissed. "Tsubasa?" croaked Sona. What is?" "Persona," Tsubasa said shortly. "Like Philemon said?" Whether it was the fact that she could defend herself or just the knowledge she wasn't insane, she was a lot calmer and steadier than she was before. "Galahad is my persona. I can fight if it's with him." "Master," interrupted Galahad, eyeing the mechanical musician cautiously. "While I am fully capable of defending you, if I fight all out, this place could collapse. Your friends should evacuate while they still can." Tsubasa spared a glance over her shoulder. Saji, the girl still in his arms, scurried back to his friends. "Prez?" For the briefest moment, Sona hesitated. "Grab a chair or something," she said finally. "We're breaking this window." "Just beat it. Beat it." The thing started to moonwalk backwards, the glittery shurikens floating out the various walls, people and bits of furniture they'd embedded into to float like a cloud of fireflies about his shoulders. "Beat it. Beat it." He made a slow spin before posing with his hands splayed, in the way a modern man would make finger guns. The cloud of throwing stars moved like they were fired out of a machine gun, hurtling toward Tsubasa like a flock of gaudy frisbees. Faster than she could see, Galahad easily intercepted the attack. They were nowhere near as sharp as the hat, and merely plinked pathetically off his shield instead of embedding in place. "No one wants to be defeated," quoted Tsubasa mockingly, as Galahad lunged forward, using the immense shield as a club. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Vergil Creiger for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. If you like to hear adult version of this and other stories, I'll give you link of my Patreon. See you in the next video. Goodbye.